Welcome to Neural Nexus Podcast, where we explore the hottest topics shaping the world. Let's dive in.
All right, strap yourselves in because this deep dive, well, it's a bit of a wild one.
Says so.
We're going headfirst into the Trump tariffs.
Tariffs.
And no, this isn't a time machine back to 2018.
Right.
This is February 2025.
2025.
And things. They've taken a dramatic turn, shall we say.
I'm intrigued.
You sent over that excerpt from Forbes, you know.
Yes, I know the one.
Trump tariffs live updates.
Proposed Canada and Mexico tariffs paused.
The whole thing reads like some kind of political thriller.
A thriller, you say?
Yeah. Initial shock, complete market mayhem, retaliation, and then, out of the blue, these pauses.
It's certainly a lot to unpack.
It's a lot to unpack.
Where shall we begin?
Well, I think what's really striking is the sheer speed of it all.
The speed, yes.
And the global impact. I mean, we're not just talking about some policy announcements here.
No, not at all.
This is sending ripples across international markets.
Immediate ripple.
Immediate ripples.
Right from the get-go, February 1st, 2025.
Bam.
Trump drops this bombshell. A 25% tariff on goods from Canada and Mexico.
Whoa.
Canadian Energy gets a slightly better deal, 10%.
Oh, so they get a little bit of a break.
But then he piles on another 10% on top of what's already there for China.
And what's the reasoning behind all of this?
His words. Holding these countries accountable.
Accountable for?
Specifically, halting illegal immigration and stopping the flow of fentanyl.
The fentanyl angle is where it all gets a little,
Murky.
Murky.
Trudeau shot back right away.
Oh, really?
Said Canada's contribution to the U.S. fentanyl problem is a tiny fraction. And, we've got these massive fentanyl seizures happening at the U.S.-Mexico border.
Right, not the Canadian border.
Not the Canadian one.
So is this really about fentanyl, or is there something else at play here?
A lot of analysts are asking that very question.
Yeah.
It's crucial to remember with international trade.
Yeah.
It's rarely ever about just one issue. There's always this web of economic and political factors.
A whole tangled web.
A tangled web indeed.
Well, the markets definitely reacted like it was a big deal.
Boy, did.
We saw the Nikkei drop 2%, FTSE shedding 1.5%.
Significant drops.
Even Dow futures taking a nosedive.
Signaling a rough open on Wall Street.
And even Bitcoin, typically less tied to traditional markets, it dipped over 3%.
Interesting.
And get this Trump's own meme coin, Trump B, that tanked over 13%.
Even his digital supporters are feeling the heat.
What do you make of that?
Suggests a lack of confidence.
That lack of confidence.
Even among those who might typically back his plays.
So they're not buying it, literally.
When investors see instability like this, especially with international trade, they tend to pull back.
They get nervous.
And this wasn't just a small dip. These were significant drops across the board.
Yeah.
And Canada and Mexico, they didn't just sit back and take it.
Oh, no, they hit back.
Retaliatory tariffs.
Tit for tat.
But their approaches, well, they were distinct.
Distinct? How so?
Mexico went for agricultural goods.
Interesting.
Seems aimed at putting pressure on Republicans, specifically those representing farming states.
Oh, I see. Playing the political game?
But Canada's response was more calculated, I'd say.
More strategic.
They zeroed in on products made in key swing states.
Oh, wow.
States that could swing upcoming elections.
So they're thinking long term.
Not just reacting in the heat of the moment.
More chess than checkers.
Precisely.
But we can't forget the man at the center of it all.
No, we can't.
Trump took to Truth Social.
Of course he did.
Posts like, make your product in the USA and there are no tariffs.
Ah, yes.
Will there be some pain? Yes, maybe, and maybe not. But we will make America great again, and it will all be worth the price that must be paid.
Classic Trump.
It's classic Trump. Bold, defiant, playing directly to his base.
But this rhetoric, familiar as it is, it carries a different weight in 2025.
How so?
We've had years of these trade disputes,
Yeah.
shifting global dynamics.
It's not just a campaign slogan anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
These are policies with very real consequences.
Very real consequence.
Okay, so we've got market chaos, we've got international retaliation, and Trump doubling down on his America First stance.
You'd think it couldn't get more dramatic.
Right.
But then, just 2 days later, February 3rd,
The plot twist.
a plot twist indeed.
He announces a 30-day pause on the tariffs for both Canada and Mexico.
A pause.
What in the world prompted these sudden deals?
Well, Canada agreed to this $1.3 billion border reinforcement plan.
Border reinforcing.
New helicopters, tech, personnel,
All to combat fentanyl flow.
all to combat that fentanyl flow.
And Mexico?
Pledges 10,000 National Guard troops to their border, again, focusing on drug trafficking.
It's interesting, isn't it, the timing of these pauses right after all the initial shock and retaliation?
That does suggest a strategy.
Almost like it was calculated from the start.
And these concessions, particularly from Canada,
Yeah.
they seem to directly address Trump's initial concerns.
But does it really add up?
That's the question.
Because Canada already said they weren't this big source of fentanyl.
They did.
So are we really tackling the root cause here?
Or is this more about appearances?
It's almost like he bluffed his way to getting what he wanted.
It does appear that way.
Now, what happens if his bluff gets called?
That's an excellent question.
What are the risks?
Any perceived weakness, it could embolden other nations to start challenging U.S. trade dominance.
Oh, yeah.
And the economic fallout at home, even if it's temporary, it could erode public support.
So there's a lot riding on these next 30 days.
A lot riding on these 30 days.
A lot riding on these 30 days.
And while Canada and Mexico are getting this temporary reprieve, China,
They're not backing down.
they're taking their case to the World Trade Organization.
What does that actually mean, like in practical terms?
The WTO, they have the power to rule on whether these tariffs violate international trade agreements.
Oh, so they could force his hand.
If they side with China, the U.S. either backs down or faces penalties.
So even more economic pressure.
Potentially.
But even if this whole thing with Canada and Mexico gets resolved, it feels like the bigger picture is shifting.
Shifting how so?
Trump even hinted at future universal tariffs on all imported goods.
All imported goods.
What would that mean for the global economy?
That's where things get really interesting.
And what would it mean for you, the listener?
Stick with us as we explore what these tariffs could mean for your wallet, your job, and the future of global trade. Welcome back.
Right. So
We've laid out the timeline of this whole tariff saga.
yeah.
But even with these temporary pauses for Canada and Mexico,
Right.
there are a lot of potential consequences to unpack.
Yeah, things might seem a little calmer right now on the surface.
Sure.
But there's definitely this air of uncertainty hanging around. And honestly, what I'm sure you want to know is, what does all this mean for the average person? Like, is this going to hit our wallets?
It's a valid question.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the answer is probably yes.
Mm.
One of the most immediate and tangible impacts of tariffs.
Yeah.
It's rising prices.
Okay, so like,
Think about all those everyday items, the ones we get from Canada, Mexico, and China.
okay, yeah, like what?
Groceries, clothes, electronics, even car parts.
Okay.
Those tariffs, they add costs.
Mm.
And those costs get passed down the line. And
Oh, it's
ultimately,
the consumer who ends up paying.
oh, fantastic. The Forbes article, actually,
Yeah?
it cites a study by the Tax Foundation.
Okay.
They estimate these tariffs could add over $830 in taxes per U.S. household
This year.
this year alone.
That's not nothing.
It's a substantial hit, especially for families who are already feeling the pinch.
right. And it's not just about those imported goods, right?
Yeah.
What about stuff made here
Well, domestic producers, they're facing less competition now.
from the cheaper imports?
Exactly. So
Oh.
they often raise their prices too.
So like it's a
Double whammy
Yeah.
for consumers.
Imports get more expensive because of the tariffs. Local goods get more expensive because companies know they can get away with it.
Precisely.
We're getting squeezed from both sides.
And this is just the beginning.
Oh, no.
These tariffs, they can trigger a chain reaction.
Oh, God.
You get supply chains disrupted. Business is facing all this uncertainty.
And that leads to
Job losses.
job losses. Ugh.
The article quotes several business leaders
Wowie.
voicing some serious concerns.
Ah.
The CEO of the National Association of Manufacturers,
Oh, okay.
he warned that these ripple effects could be severe,
Severe.
especially for smaller manufacturers.
Right, because they usually operate on tighter margins, don't they?
Exactly.
They don't have as much wiggle room to absorb these kinds of cost increases.
They might have to cut back on hiring, scale down investments,
Or even
or in the worst case scenario,
yeah.
close up shop altogether.
Oh, that's
And it's not just manufacturing either.
no.
Big retailers like Walmart, Best Buy,
Mm.
they've expressed worries about how these tariffs might impact their bottom line.
Which ultimately
To consumers.
trickles down to consumers.
It's like this tangled web, you know.
It is.
It's hard to predict exactly what'll snap first.
It is a complex situation.
But it seems like most economists agree these tariffs, they're probably going to have a negative impact on the overall economy.
It's a legitimate concern.
Yeah.
And we haven't even touched on the wider ramifications.
Because this isn't just about economics. It's about geopolitics.
And the future of global trade.
The whole episode, it's been like an eye-opener.
How so?
Just how interconnected everything is, you know? One event, seemingly isolated, can trigger this domino effect that's felt across the world.
It's true. It really drives home the point that international relations, they're not just some abstract concepts, you know?
They're not.
They have very real consequences.
Very real consequences.
But how these countries, especially the U.S., how they handle these disputes, it sends a message to the rest of the world.
What kind of message?
It sets a precedent for future trade negotiations.
Right.
If Trump is willing to use tariffs as leverage, even against allies like Canada and Mexico, what's to stop him from using the same tactic with other countries?
That's the question a lot of world leaders are probably asking themselves right now.
And the answer?
Not much.
Not much.
Trump has consistently shown that he's willing to break with conventional norms.
Yeah.
Even if it means, jeopardizing relationships with key allies.
And remember that comment he made about potential universal tariffs?
On all imported goods.
Yeah, that one sent chills down my spine.
It would be a radical shift. Decades of U.S. trade policy.
And could easily lead to
a full-blown trade war.
On multiple fronts.
The fallout from that. Almost unimaginable.
It's like we're standing on a precipice. Yeah. No one knows what awaits us at the bottom.
Uncertainty seems to be the theme of the day.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? But beyond this immediate chaos, what are the underlying forces at play here? Like, what's really driving these decisions?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
To really understand Trump's motivations, we need to look beyond the surface. The broader context,
which involve
economics, geopolitics, even a hefty dose of political maneuvering.
So are we talking about a calculated strategy, or is this just impulsive decision making?
It's probably a bit of both.
Both.
On one hand, there's a clear economic motivation.
How so?
Trump's consistently argued that the U.S. is getting a raw deal in trade agreements, and he sees tariffs as a tool
to
level the playing field, bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S.
Right, that America First rhetoric, that's been his bread and butter.
From day one.
But isn't that a bit simplistic?
In what way?
Plenty of economists have warned that these tariffs will actually end up hurting the U.S. economy.
In the long run.
In the long run, yeah.
And that's where the political element comes in.
Okay.
Trump is a master of catering to his base.
He knows how to play the game.
And he knows that even if it's harmful in the long term, these tariffs can be presented as a win.
In the short term.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all about perception, especially in this age of social media and 2047 news.
Absolutely.
But there's also the geopolitical dimension to consider.
Oh, absolutely.
Trump's been very vocal about his desire to reshape the global order. And he sees trade as a key lever in achieving that.
So these tariffs, they're not just about economics. They're also about
asserting American dominance
on the world stage.
It's a valid interpretation.
Especially when you consider, China's rising economic and military power.
Right.
The trade war with China.
Yeah.
In many ways, it's a proxy battle for global influence.
Like a high-stakes game of chess.
With the whole world watching.
You see who makes the next move.
It's a tense situation.
But before we get too carried away with this whole global power struggle, let's bring it back to our listener,
Of course.
What should they be paying attention to as this story unfolds? What are the key things to watch out for?
Well, first and foremost, buckle up.
Because
this is going to be a bumpy ride.
Oh, yeah.
These trade disputes, they're not going to vanish overnight.
No.
We could see more tariffs, more retaliations, and more market volatility.
Ugh. But beyond the headlines. What
are the key takeaways?
Yeah.
Firstly, we've seen how interconnected the global economy really is.
Yeah.
Seemingly isolated events, they can have these ripple effects across the planet. We also need to be aware of the complex interplay between economics and politics.
Right.
Decisions aren't always driven by logic or long-term strategy.
Unfortunately.
And perhaps most importantly,
these
aren't just abstract concepts we're talking about.
These events.
They have very real consequences,
like
people's lives.
Very real consequences.
Precisely.
No.
As you go about your day, think about the products you buy,
The news you consume.
the conversations you have,
And ask yourself,
how are these global events shaping your life
what role do you play?
in this interconnected world, and how can we collectively strive for a more equitable and just global system?
These are questions worth pondering.
Even beyond this deep dive.
Well said. I think that's a great point to wrap up part 2.
Part 2.
We've covered a lot of ground,
From
the immediate impacts of tariffs on your wallet to the wider implications for global power dynamics.
It has been quite a journey.
It's been intense, informative, straight. Honestly, a little bit unsettling.
But unsettling can be a good thing.
How so?
It can push us to,
We're searching our assumptions,
seek out new information,
engaging,
meaningful conversations.
and
That's what this deep dive is all about.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up, we want to leave you with this final thought.
A final thought.
The world is changing rapidly.
Yeah.
It's more important than ever to be an active participant, not just a passive observer.
To stay curious, stay engaged,
And stay informed.
and perhaps most importantly, never stop learning.
Because
There's always more to discover, more to understand, and more to do.
this is just the beginning of the conversation.
Beginning.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive
We'll be back soon.
with another exploration of the forces shaping our world.
Until then, stay curious.
And we're back. This deep dive, I gotta say, it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride.
It has been, hasn't it?
We went from shock tariffs to complete market mayhem,
Really?
sudden pauses. And now we're kind of staring down the barrel of potential long-term shifts in global trade.
It is a lot to process.
It's a lot to process. So let's try to break it down, make sense of it all.
You've used that term roller coaster a few times.
Have I?
You have, and I think it's an apt analogy.
Really?
The world, it's gotten used to a certain level of stability
I have.
in international trade, especially under the established rules-based system.
Right.
But what we're seeing now,
Yeah.
this is a potential disruption of that system.
So if we're stepping off the roller coaster and into uncharted territory,
Uncharted territory.
what are the potential long-term consequences we need to be really thinking about?
One major concern: erosion of trust
Okay, trust
between nations.
Okay.
These abrupt tariffs, even with the pauses,
Yeah.
they can damage relationships,
Mm-hmm.
and they also create a lot of uncertainty for businesses.
So they're less likely to
Yeah,
invest and
process-
expand. That makes sense if you're a company trying to plan for the future and then bam, the rules of the game change.
warning.
It makes you think twice before you make any big move.
This kind of instability, it can stifle economic growth,
Not just in
not just in the countries directly involved,
but globally.
and we can't forget about the potential for retaliation.
Right.
If the U.S. keeps going down this path,
Yeah.
other countries, they might feel like they have to respond
With their own,
with their own protectionist measures.
and then we're in a full-blown trade war.
And in a trade war,
Everyone loses.
everyone loses.
Prices go up, consumer choice goes down, the global economy takes a hit.
It's very real risk.
And like we were talking about earlier, this isn't just about economics.
Right.
There are geopolitical implications too.
If the U.S. is seen as unreliable or acting unilaterally,
It could.
it could weaken its position on the world stage.
So what does this mean for you, the listener? How do you navigate this increasingly uncertain landscape?
First and foremost, stay informed.
Okay.
Pay attention to how these trade disputes unfold,
Yeah.
and what the potential ramifications are.
Don't just
Don't just rely on headlines.
right.
Dig deeper. Seek out multiple perspectives, and really think critically about the information you're consuming.
Yeah, I think that's crucial advice for anyone trying to make sense of the world these days, not just in the realm of international trade,
It's applicable across the board.
but beyond staying informed. What can people actually do? It all feels so big and complex.
It's easy to feel powerless
Yeah.
in the face of global events.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there are steps you can take.
Like,
Support businesses that align with your values.
Okay.
Those that prioritize, ethical sourcing and fair trade practices.
okay, so be a conscious consumer.
Exactly.
Advocate for policies that promote international cooperation.
And sustainable economic growth.
Make your voice heard.
Make your voice heard.
But what about those universal tariff Trump hinted at? That feels like the big elephant in the room.
It is the wild card.
Yeah.
It's difficult to predict what'll happen if he actually follows through.
It could be
A game changer.
yeah.
It could usher in a whole new era of protectionism,
Oh.
spark a global trade war with devastating consequences.
It sounds like we're at a crossroads.
We are at a crossroads.
The decisions made in the coming weeks and months,
They could have a lasting impact,
not just on
the global economy, on the very fabric of international relations.
we're witnessing a pivotal moment.
A pivotal moment in history.
And it's crucial for us to be engaged, informed, and proactive.
The future of global trade.
And maybe
even the global order.
it hangs in the balance.
It does.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Yeah.
We started with what seemed like an isolated event,
Trump's tariffs.
Trump's sudden tariffs.
Right.
And we ended up exploring this complex web of economics, politics, global power dynamics.
It's been quite a journey.
It's been intense, it's been informative, and honestly a little bit unsettling.
Unsettling can be a good thing.
It can. How so?
It can push us to question our assumptions,
To seek out,
new information,
to engage in.
meaningful conversations.
And that's what this deep dive is all about.
That's what it's all about.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up, we want to leave you with this final
The
thought.
final thought.
The world is changing,
Rapidly.
and it's more important than ever to be an active participant, not just a passive observer.
Stay curious, stay engaged, and stay informed.
And perhaps most importantly,
Never stop learning. There's
Really?
always more to discover, more to understand.
and more to do. This is just the beginning of the conversation.
The beginning.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another exploration of the forces shaping our world. Until then, stay curious.